Today's presentation is part of the clarinet learning community. If we were live at ClarinetFest, the intention was that we'd meet every day for 4 days. Now you get me for 4 weekends in a row. And the original focus was for my presentations to be aimed at very new players, mostly clarinetists who've been playing for up to about a year. So I am going to cover today some of the most basic, important, good habits on clarinet articulation. I know that we have some more advanced people here as well, so I'm going to throw in some more advanced techniques, and I'm also going to do my best to teach really efficiently so I can take questions from you. So you'll notice that there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you have questions for me, please put them in there. And once I've gone through some things, I'd be happy to answer your questions. So great to have you all here today. I'll also just quickly mention there are so many amazing events happening at ClarinetFest this summer, all of them online. There are other presentations in the clarinet learning community that really go really well with what I'm about to teach. Julie DeRoche did an amazing one on embouchure earlier today. That should be on the ICA YouTube channel later today, so you may want to follow up with that as well. And I'm here for another 2 weeks as well. So we're going to start with articulation. That's a word that you may hear a lot in music, and if you are relatively new to clarinet, you might be asking what that is. So basically, articulation is the word we use for how we start notes and how we end notes. We could start them very gently, dee, 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 or with real emphasis, dom, 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 right? That's articulation. Also, how we end them. They might be long and connected, dee, dee, dee. They might be very short and crisp, dee, dee, dee. So that's, in a nutshell, what articulation is. We often use the word tonguing because our tongue is the part of our body that's most involved in articulation. So I want to start by talking about what I feel are the two most important good habits you need to train your brain and body to do to make clarinet articulation easier. And the first one is really, what do we do with our tongue? So when we all first pick up a clarinet, put it in our mouth, odds are we just blow and make sound. It might not be a great sound, but it's so exciting. We're making sound. Then you get a little better and you want to make a nice sound. And tonguing allows us to not only have different effects when we start notes, but certainly find playing one pitch to make a distinction between them. Our instinct when we first play is to do that with our breath, kind of like going ha, ha. Most people, that's how they would naturally do it. And I'm going to be talking when I get to habit number 2, how we want to avoid that kind of behavior. But instead, imagine this is my tongue and I'm hitting my reed. What we want is our tongue, the tip of our tongue, to gently hit the tip of the reed as if we're saying T, T, T. I'm going to use T for now. There's other syllables that work, and I'll throw in some of those later. Wouldn't worry too much exactly about what part of your tongue and exactly where you're hitting on the reed, because studies show it's actually different for everyone. We all have different faces. But here's my formula that I recommend for you to help you find what might be the best spot for you. All you're going to do, if you got your clarinet out, I hope you do. If you don't, get it out or watch the replay and have it in hand. You're going to put your mouthpiece in your mouth as if you're playing. Shape your embouchure. If you didn't see my embouchure thing from last week, we talked about the 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. As if you're playing. Make sure your corners are sealed. And then literally speak the word T, 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 imagining your tongue staying really close to the reed and barely moving. It feels funny. This is what it would sound like. T, 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 T. What this does is for most of us, when we say T, our tongue is in the perfect shape, hitting the right part of the reed for our face. By sealing my lips and speaking, I'm getting my brain used to clarinet and mouth. This is what the tongue does. The reason I'm going with the syllable with an E sound, it helps us to get our tongue high in the mouth, which, especially for a classical music, really helps our tone. And I'll talk more about that in an upcoming session, but it's a good syllable to think of. So that is the first step to just figuring out what part of your tongue should hit the reed. If I whispered it, if I just kind of said, T, 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 I'm going to get closer to my mic. You can hear my tongue hitting the reed. Now, as our tongue hits the reed, one of the habits we want to train it on is actually to hit it very gently. So if I were whispering and you could really hear it loudly, I'm probably doing what I call hammer tongue. We're going to avoid hammer tongue. So if you're new to tonguing, you want to imagine that your tongue is hovering close to the reed and hitting it really gently. So try speaking it that way. Here's my tongue on the reed. And if I morph into playing, I could just take an open G. What I'm thinking of is touching lightly and barely moving it. Now that's a really relatively simple exercise, but if you haven't been having your tongue hitting the reed, or maybe it's been hitting the reed in a different spot or a different part of your tongue, that's going to feel really awkward and unfamiliar. And so I'm a big fan when we're learning a new skill of focusing just on that one thing. So what I like about playing an open G, I don't have to think about my fingers. I don't have to think about much else. All of my attention is going on to what my tongue is doing. When that starts to get easier, then you start to do it on different notes. So that's our first good habit, is that we're thinking of T, T, T. If that feels strange to you, the good news is our tongue is the most flexible muscle in our whole body. It learns really quickly. So if you just did that for a minute or two, really concentrating on it every day, probably after a week, it's going to feel completely normal and natural, no matter how strange it might feel up front. Now, those of you who have been tonguing a while, I want to challenge you on the hammer tongue thing, because so many people hammer tongue, and not all the time, but when the music gets hard. It's our body's natural instinct when something is hard to tense up. We see it, our fingers start smashing, which will interrupt the music, but also will slow you down. Our jaw tightens, which makes us squeak. So when we play, we want great posture, strength on the sides of our mouth, but most of our body, arms, tongue, is going to be quite relaxed and loose and graceful. So if you're a more experienced player, you could do that exercise just from the point of view of, can I move my tongue more gently? All right. The second good habit, if you're new to tonguing, or even if you're not new, I challenge you to really check this on yourself, is that our body is trained when our tongue moves for our air to change every time it moves. It's because we speak that way. Otherwise, I would talk like this and it would be really boring. So that's just a trained, learned behavior our tongue likes to do. What that translates to on clarinet for every single clarinetist I've ever seen is that when we start tonguing, we emphasize as our tongue hits with our breath, and then we let our air fade. Either fade a bit or even stop, so that this is what our air sounds like. We get this breathy, and just having our air stop all the time really makes our tone not very well supported, so it gets kind of fuzzy and airy. If any of you ever find that you can slur high notes with no problem, but when you tongue them, they don't work, one of the biggest reasons is that we're letting our air down. And high notes are just more reactive to how fast our air is. So I might be able to slur up here. If I'm tonguing and even subtly letting my air down, I might find that note doesn't want to come out. So we need to train ourselves that our air is steady nonstop. Here's a great exercise. Shape your embouchure as if you're playing clarinet. Blow really fast, hissing air. And just put your finger in front of your lips, blocking that hole. And this is like inside out tonguing. This is the tongue outside of my mouth. That's what tonguing should feel like. As far as my blowing muscles were concerned, it's one nonstop airstream. My tongue is interrupting it. This is what our tongue wants to do. You can practice whispering that by sort of having your tongue on the inside of your mouth do what my finger was just doing, sort of covering that hole, almost like I'm spitting shell off of my lips. So if we have that innate, ingrained habit to stop blowing, you'll hear it. And then you can fix it. So a lot of the stuff where we're fighting what our brain is used to doing and our body is used to doing, we can even do it without our clarinet. You can just walk around the house going, go back to that open G. And now earlier we were thinking about how light we were hitting the reed and how little we were moving our tongue. Now I want your focus to be, how steady is your breath? And this is not natural. It takes some training. If you're more advanced, do it on some higher notes because that's where we're going to notice more of a difference. And you could work your way up a scale. Just take some high notes, work on it. Most of us do inadvertently move our air a bit, and we want to train ourselves to have it steady. Now, of course, sometimes there's effects where we have an accent where we want to emphasize a note where we will give it a bit of extra air, but we want to do it intentionally. So this idea of we change our air unintentionally is what we want to train out of our system. All right, now certain kinds of articulation, if we're playing jazz, for example, we might even want the lightest possible touch. We can almost think of a D, D, D rather than a T, T, T. So if I'm doing something jazzy, I might take that open G and just play a swing rhythm. Right there, I'm thinking more D, 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 D. And it's just a lighter touch on the reed. These are all just skills we have to train our tongue to do. And again, focusing on it really hard for a short time really helps. Now, if you're new to clarinet, those two things, thinking of saying, whispering T, 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 so you figure out what part of your tongue hits what part of the reed, that's a habit you want to make automatic. Keeping our air steady, you want to make automatic. For everyone, especially those of you who've been playing a while, we want to avoid hammer tongue, keeping our tongue closer to it. Those are all good habits that make our basic tonguing work a lot better. One of the effects that we often see in music is staccato, right? Staccato, I don't have an example at hand, but it's like you have a note with a little dot over it or below it. And that means we want the note to be shorter. So I want to show you, there's kind of two main ways to do staccato on clarinet. One of them, and this is the one everyone defaults to if they've not been taught anything else, is we stop blowing between the notes. So if I'm going T, T, and there's staccato, I want to hear more T, T. I want space between the notes. So if we do the stop blowing, that absolutely is a legitimate way to do staccato. However, it's really hard for most of us to use fast air that activates the reed and then end it instantly. Usually we end up fading it while we're trying to stop blowing, and then our tone kind of fuzzes out. So unless we're really well trained at it, which you can be, we kind of get this effect. You can hear how my tone kind of breaths out. So if I were to work on stop blowing staccato, getting it really good, this is a more advanced technique. I wouldn't worry about this if you're in your first year of playing. We really want to train our air muscles to keep our air support almost like we've blown up a big balloon and we're pinching the mouth shut. The air pressure's there the whole time. And we're just releasing it in bursts. And that takes a lot of control with our blowing muscles. But I would take a note and do bursts of air without tonguing just to control that air support. But for today, I want to talk about the other type of staccato that I think everybody should learn. And we call it stop tongue staccato. And here's how stop tongue staccato works. My tongue starts the note by saying T, and the reed's vibrating like crazy. My tongue comes back to the reed and closes it off, and the sound stops instantly. It's like this. T, 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 and that makes the note short. Some people say we can think of staccato roughly as cutting the note in half. It depends on the music. Some music likes longer staccato, some music likes really crisp. But for now, let's kind of use that half length as a starter guideline. It's our tongues for most of us. Now, if, like I said earlier, if you haven't been tonguing notes, get used to starting the notes with your tongue first. If you've never done stop tonguing, our tongue is not used to ending it. And so what we want to do is just slow motion on an open G. This is my tongue. What my finger is, we're going to do this. And at first, you might find your tongue goes ta, ta, ta. It's inconsistent. But here's what it sounds like. I'll try and make my finger hair be my tongue. I'm just going to do it on an open G. Now, here's the thing about this exercise that I'm showing you. I want you to keep blowing the whole time. This means there's whatever that is, half a second where I'm closing the reed and I'm still blowing. If I did this for a long time, my head would explode. So don't explode your head. And obviously, if you feel a lot of back pressure and it's uncomfortable, stop, regain. But for that split second, we can get away with it. The reason we want to keep our air going is so that when we lift our tongue off the reed, the air is there and the sound comes out instantly. For this exercise to train your tongue, you really need to do it in slow motion. Ta, ta, so you hear the space between the notes. Let me demonstrate again. Do it with me if you have your clarinet out. 3, 4. So I would stay in that stage until you feel like you're blowing the whole time and you're getting a clean end to the notes. Now, it's easy to start hammering here. Again, that can be very gentle. Ta, ta. So keep your tongue gentle. It doesn't take much to close that reed shut. Then we're going to try and make that process happen more quickly. Da, da, da. So as soon as my tongue comes off the reed, it's going to come back. As a training exercise, I'm going to keep my open G going. I'm going to keep blowing. This is going to make a really short, pecky note. Probably won't sound that musical. It's okay. This is a training exercise to get my tongue moving more quickly so I get a shorter note, and I'm still training myself to blow the whole time. You might even get air leaking out the sides of your mouth. For this exercise, that's okay. We wouldn't probably do that when we're playing a song, but now at this stage, a lot of people just start going really fast. But at that speed, I actually wasn't ending any note. I was just starting the next one. Ta, 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 ta. So I want you to keep your beat slow. So we can really hear the space between the notes. And this process that I'm showing you is kind of step by step how we train our tongues to do what we call stop tongue staccato. And at first it can feel really clumsy, but again, remember what I said, our tongue is the most flexible muscle in our body. It learns really quickly. Once I can do those short little pecky, then I want to maybe put 2 together. And then I might morph into a quarter note and then 4 staccato 16th notes. The whole time thinking about not moving my tongue much, not hammering, and I'm going to listen to my 4 short notes. We usually have a habit of making one of them longer. Sometimes we'll go ta, 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 ta. So maybe the 4th one's longer. Maybe it's the first one, ta, 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 ta. When we're holding the long note, it gives our tongue a chance to rest, which is important. It also reminds us of what our air feels like when we're playing a long note. And that should be just kind of a note to yourself. Yeah, my air should feel the same when I'm doing the 4 short notes as far as how I'm blowing as it does when I'm just playing a steady tone. And for most people, if you start working on this using the step-by-step, so first we're just blowing solidly, then we're starting lightly, T, 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 then we're going half on, half off, T, T, and then we're making it really short, T, T, and then maybe T, 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 T. That starts to train our tongue. Now, for everyone, especially maybe those of you more advanced, if you find you can't tongue quickly enough, this exercise is one of the best ways I know of to build speed, because when we train our tongue to make the note really short, in order to do that, it comes off the reed. It has to come back really quickly. The bonus is it builds speed. So you could also turn on your metronome and say, what's the most comfortable speed, the fastest comfortable speed I can go, T, 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 T. So maybe when you start, you're around 70 or something. Try and push it a little bit every day. And what you'll find is each week you can probably turn it up a little bit. Until your tongue will just feel light and bouncy, and you can go pretty fast. You can single tongue a lot more quickly than many people think. And this is the tool, the technique that helps you develop that. So everything I've just covered is a lot of the basics of tonguing. Having for a more classical sound, thinking of a he, so our tongue is high, having it not move much, whatever part of our tongue we naturally hit when we speak, P, 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 gets us positioned properly on the reed. And then this whole idea of learning stop tongue staccato, those are tools that serve you really well, whether you're in your first year of playing or you've been playing longer. But I want to take some questions here. I see that if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, please. And I also see that Jessica's put a link to Julie's session earlier. So Gary's asking, what is double tonguing and how is it done? Good question, Gary. So what I've been just doing is sort of regular tonguing or single tonguing, right? Where my tongue hits the reed and that's what starts or stops the note. Double tonguing is certainly used on clarinet by many players quite effectively. It's more common in the brass world and the flute world. In double tonguing, our tongue comes forward and hits the reed, and then it goes back and hits the roof of our mouth. Often the syllables people will use will be something like do-ga, do-ga, do-ga. So let's see if I can do this. So it's like, here's my mouth, do-ga, do-ga. It's hitting on the backside, the roof of my mouth. If you just speak, dee-gee, dee-gee, or tee-key, tee-key, you'll feel your tongue doing that. And again, like any other skill, we want to start by doing it super slow motion. I might just go. Now, I'll confess, I'm not great at fast double tonguing, and even at slow double tonguing, I'm not as clean as someone who's really trained on it. I was just told by my teacher, like, learn to single tongue really fast. So most of the time, that's what I use. But there are people who are phenomenal double tonguers, and it's a really useful skill to have. That's kind of how we do it. All right. Oh, Lucy's asking, what's the white part? Yeah, it's just a particular mouthpiece patch. I also think we always should have a focus, like something we're working on. If you saw my presentation last week, I talked about having the optimal amount of reed in our mouth. Well, after doing that, I noticed I was slipping toward the tip of the mouthpiece a bit, which we tend to do over time. So this is my reminder to have my teeth lower than that little white patch. It's a physical reminder. That's a tool to help me get back in the good habit that I want to create. And I'm a big fan of creating good habits, but also having tactile tools if we can. All right, Sarah's saying, I have a student who makes a slight coughing sound before she tongues a note. Do you have any advice on how to correct this? So without hearing it, Sarah, I can't be positive, but I will say this. I've heard a lot of people, again, if no one teaches you how to tongue when you start, you kind of figure out how to imitate it. And a lot of people do that with their throat, almost like going guh, guh, guh. And it does articulate if you just kind of speak guh, guh. But it often kind of sends air like into our nose even, and it makes a coughing sound. And they can get very good at it, so much so that you might not be aware that their tongue is not hitting the reed. But if you imagine going t and then trying to do it's much slower because we're moving so much of our tongue and it's closing our throat. So what I would encourage you to do, Sarah, is have her do that whisper thing where she whispers T. So you could hear if her tongue is hitting the reed. And if it's not, she's going to be like, whoa, that feels so strange. That's something new. And then you guide her through some of the steps that we talked about earlier today. But that's really common. It's like a guttural tongue, using your throat instead of your tongue. And a question here, can I talk about anchor tonguing? That's also a super common habit people fall into. If I could do a visual of it, anchor tonguing is where we kind of put the tip of our tongue lower, somewhere in our mouth. Maybe we're putting it on our bottom teeth or our bottom lip, and then we're kind of pushing our tongue forward and using more the middle of our tongue. So for many people, that creates kind of a clumsy, mushy articulation, and it can be a problem. So again, for most people, if you put it in your mouth and speak, you'll see what works. I would say for like 95% of the people, we don't want to anchor tongue. And the only reason I'm leaving a little bit of space, I do know someone who actually did, studies of measuring with different devices where they could actually see what the tongue was doing. And they found someone who could anchor tongue really cleanly, really fast, and they got great tone. So if it works for you, yes, but for most people, it slows us down and makes it mushy. And if we can do what we're talking about more, however you speak, you do get better results. So, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to use the exact part of your tongue I do, but you have to find one that works where you can get a light, quick touch. And usually speaking is our best way to do it because you talk regularly. That's just the natural position for us. Okay, and just another question here. Can I talk about the role of air in clean articulation? So notice in a lot of the exercises I was demonstrating to you today, I said we want our air to keep blowing. And that our default is our air either stops or kind of fades away. So when we were talking about stop tongue, I'm blowing the whole time. Teet, teet. That gives a really clean ending to the note. It's like as soon as I lift my tongue away, the air support is there. If I were kind of half huffing, ta, 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 you're going to hear it doesn't sound quite as good. I start to feel really out of breath. So the stop tonguing staccato is one I like to use whenever it's fast and lively. That way I know my airstream is solid, it's fast, the reed's going to vibrate like crazy as soon as my tongue is there. I not only get a clean ending to the notes, it's likely to start as soon as I lift my tongue off the reed. So again, especially if we're in the high register, then when I take my tongue off the reed, the note's going to start more easily. So in a way, all the concepts I'm saying sound kind of simple and kind of basic, but they're really not natural. We really do have to train ourselves. So I really want you as clarinetists to be aware of these habits. Thinking T, thinking whatever your tongue hits the reed when you speak T, T, T. Training yourself not to hammer tongue, especially when it's hard. Learning stop tonguing, T, 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 will enable you to not only have a nice staccato, it'll help you tongue faster. And even when you're tonguing slowly, check to see if your air might be fading just a little bit. Ta, ta. I wasn't stopping blowing, but my air was kind of pulsing and my tone wasn't quite as good. That high C, although it came out right away, which is great, it still was a little unsupported. If I keep my air more steady, that note's going to come out honestly feeling quite easy. And that's what we want. We want the clarinet to feel easy as we go. All right, I know that there's another recital starting shortly, so I'm just going to see if I've missed any questions. I can answer one more question. If anyone has one, quickly type it in. Otherwise, I'll say that I'm back here in the clarinet learning community next week to work on fingers. Ways to make moving around the clarinet feel easier for you, and also how to build finger speed, which is always a problem. At times, there's got to be that piece of music where you have trouble playing fast enough, so we're going to talk about that. All right, I believe that's everything, and this will be up on YouTube for you in the next couple of days. I really encourage you to tune in to some of the other live events at ClarinetFest and go to the ICA Clarinet channel. And I'll say one other thing. Some of you have sent me emails telling me how much you're enjoying this. Please direct them to the International Clarinet Association because they should know how much we appreciate the wonderful things they're doing. So Jessica, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michelle. It's awesome as always. So I'm going to get this edited and uploaded within the next hour. So you'll see it up on YouTube if you came in late or if you just want to review some of this information. Again, please check out Julie DeRoche's session that happened right before this because she did talk a bit about the formation of the embouchure, which is really crucial. So I've dropped in the chat the link to the next session, which is starting now over on YouTube. So I hope to see you there. And thanks again. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.